The banker's refusal hit Willa Zimmerman like a physical blow, the words echoing in the cramped office as morning light filtered through dusty windows onto the mahogany desk between them. "I cannot accept this signature, Miss Zimmerman, regardless of what your father's will states about the ranch passing to you, because the law is quite clear that a woman's signature holds no legal weight in property transactions." Willa's hands trembled as she clutched the deed papers, her father's careful handwriting still visible on the yellowed parchment. 3 weeks old now since pneumonia had taken Samuel Zimmerman in the harsh winter of 1882. The ranch outside Parowan, Utah had been her entire world for 22 years, every fence post and watering hole as familiar as her own heartbeat, and now this man with his polished shoes and starched collar was telling her it meant nothing because she had been born female. "My father built that ranch from nothing," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He wanted me to have it. The will is legal." "The will may be legal, but your signature is not sufficient to complete the transfer of property," the banker replied, not unkindly, but with the finality of someone who had explained this same situation dozens of times before. "You need a male relative to sign on your behalf, or a husband. Those are your options, Miss Zimmerman." "I have no male relatives." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "My mother died when I was 12, and I was their only child." The banker adjusted his spectacles, clearly uncomfortable. "Then I suggest you consider matrimony. A woman of your age should be thinking about such things anyway. Once you have a husband, he can sign the papers and take ownership, and the ranch will remain in your family, so to speak." The casual dismissal of everything her father had worked for, everything he had wanted for her specifically, made her stomach twist. She gathered the papers with shaking hands, refusing to let this man see her cry. "Thank you for your time," she managed, then walked out into the cold February morning before her composure could crack completely. Parowan's main street stretched before her, the small town nestled in the high desert valley with the red rock mountains rising in the distance. Snow still clung to the peaks despite the bright sunshine, and the air carried that sharp clarity that came with elevation. She had grown up making the 10-mile trip into town with her father, sitting beside him on the wagon seat as he taught her everything about running a ranch, about reading weather and cattle and the land itself. He had never treated her as lesser because she wore skirts instead of trousers, had never suggested she needed a man to think for her or sign for her or speak for her, but Samuel Zimmerman's progressive views had died with him, apparently. Willa stood on the wooden sidewalk, trying to figure out her next move, when she heard horses approaching at speed. 3 riders came down the street, and something about their formation made her instinctively step back against the storefront. They reined in at the bank's hitching post, and the lead rider dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it. He was tall and lean, probably a few years older than she was, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the summer sky before a storm. He wore range clothes that had seen hard use, and a Colt revolver sat on his hip with the comfortable familiarity of a necessary tool. He glanced at her as he tied his horse, and something in his expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, though she knew with certainty they had never met. "Morning, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. Willa nodded, unable to trust her voice, and watched as he and his companions entered the bank. She should leave, should ride back to the ranch and figure out what to do next, but her feet seemed rooted to the planks beneath them. Through the bank's window, she could see the tall cowboy approaching the same desk where she had just been denied, could see him pulling papers from his coat. She did not know why she waited, why she cared what happened to a stranger conducting his own business, but something made her linger. Perhaps it was the way he had looked at her, as though he actually saw her rather than simply a woman to be dismissed or managed. Perhaps it was just that she needed to see someone succeed where she had failed, even if it was just to prove that the world kept turning regardless of her personal catastrophe. The conversation inside grew animated. She could see the banker shaking his head, could see the cowboy's shoulders stiffen. One of his companions, a shorter man with a thick beard, gestured emphatically. The discussion continued for several minutes before the 3 men emerged. The tall cowboy's jaw set in a way that suggested barely controlled anger. "Useless," the bearded man was saying. "Absolutely useless. We drove those cattle all the way from Colorado, sold them legal and fair, and now he will not honor the bank draft because the sale was conducted under your name instead of your father's, even though your father has been dead 6 months, and everyone knows you run the outfit now." The tall cowboy noticed Willa still standing there and paused. Up close, she could see the sun-weathered lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, and something in his expression that matched the frustration burning in her own chest. "Apologies, miss," he said. "We did not mean to bring our troubles out where others could hear." "What did he tell you?" The words came out before she could stop them. "The banker, what was his reason?" The cowboy studied her for a moment, and she had the uncanny feeling he was seeing straight through to everything she had been holding back. "Said my signature was not valid because my father was the one who originally registered the ranch, and the law requires continuity of male ownership for large financial transactions. Said I needed to have my father sign even though he is 6 feet under in Colorado, or find some judge willing to declare me legal head of the estate, which apparently is like finding gold in a mud puddle. He told me my signature was not valid because I am a woman," Willa heard herself say, "that I need a husband or a male relative to sign for me, even though my father's will specifically leaves everything to me." The cowboy's expression darkened. "That is horseshit." "Samuel," the bearded man said in warning, but there was no real reproach in it. So the cowboy's name was Samuel, same as her father. The coincidence felt significant somehow, though Willa could not say why. She found herself studying him more carefully, noting the way his companions deferred to him despite his youth, the competence that radiated from him like heat from sun-baked stone. "Samuel Tanner," he said, offering his hand as though she were a man he was meeting on equal terms. "This is Pete Rawlings and Jack Chen. We run cattle out of southwestern Colorado. Or we did until my father passed and apparently took all legal claim to our work with him." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength in his grip that somehow managed not to be overwhelming. "Willa Zimmerman. I have a ranch 10 miles out. Cattle and horses mostly. Or I did, until the bank decided my father's will does not matter as much as my sex." "This is wrong," Samuel said flatly, "or there has to be something we can do." The third man, Jack Chen, who had been silent until now, spoke up in accented but clear English. "There is a territorial judge who sometimes comes through Cedar City, Judge Harrison Albright. He has a reputation for being fair-minded, for interpreting the law rather than just repeating what others tell him it means." "Cedar City is 30 miles north," Pete said doubtfully, "and there is no guarantee this judge is even there, or that he would see us if he was. Do you have a better idea?" Samuel's voice carried an edge now. "We have $6,300 in a bank draft that we cannot cash. From cattle we spent 4 months driving to market. I am not going back to Colorado empty-handed to tell the boys we couldn't pay them for their work because some banker thinks the law is whatever is most convenient for him." Willa felt something shift inside her chest, a flicker of hope she had not expected. "If there is a judge who might rule differently, I want to speak with him too. My ranch is everything. I cannot lose it because of something I had no control over." Samuel turned those storm-blue eyes on her, and she saw her own determination reflected back. "Then we should go together. Safety in numbers on the road. And maybe if he sees that this is not just one isolated case, he will be more inclined to actually do something about it." "We are talking about riding to Cedar City on the chance that this judge might be there and might be willing to help," Pete pointed out. "That is a lot of maybes." "You have somewhere more important to be?" Samuel asked him, but there was affection in the challenge. Pete grinned. "Not particularly, boss." Willa made her decision in the span of a heartbeat. "I need to go back to my ranch and make arrangements for the animals, make sure my hired man knows what needs doing while I am gone. I could be ready to leave by this afternoon." "We are staying at the boarding house on 2nd Street, Samuel said. "We can meet you there at 3 o'clock, ride out together. If we push, we can make Cedar City by tomorrow morning." It was reckless, riding off with 3 men she had just met, trusting them based on nothing more than a shared grievance and the straightforward honesty in Samuel Tanner's eyes. But everything about her situation was already precarious, already balanced on a knife's edge, and at least this was action rather than helpless waiting for the inevitable loss of everything she had ever known. 3 o'clock, she agreed. The ride back to the ranch passed in a blur, her mind racing through everything she needed to do. Tom Barker, her hired man, was 63 and had worked for her father for 2 decades. He knew the place as well as she did, could keep things running for a few days without difficulty. But the thought of leaving, of putting even temporary distance between herself and the land her father had loved, made her chest tight with anxiety. The ranch house sat in a shallow valley with good grass and reliable water from the creek that ran year-round. Her father had chosen the location carefully, had built the house and barn and corrals with his own hands over years of backbreaking work. Willa had watched it all, had helped with everything she was strong enough to manage, had learned to judge cattle and break horses and read the land's moods. This was not just property to her, it was memory made solid. It was every conversation she had ever had with her father, every lesson and laugh and quiet evening watching the sun set over the red rocks. She found Tom mending tack in the barn, his weathered hand steady on the leather. He looked up as she entered, took one look at her face, and set down the bridle. "That bad?" he asked. Willa told him everything, the words spilling out faster than she intended. Tom listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your daddy would be spitting nails over this," he said finally. "He always said you had more grit and sense than half the men in the territory combined. Made me promise, right before he passed, that I would look after you and the ranch however I could. But I am just hired help, Miss Willa. My signature would not mean any more to that banker than yours did." "I know, Tom. I am not asking you to fix this. I just need you to keep things going here while I ride to Cedar City. Try to find this judge everyone says might actually listen. I will be gone 2, maybe 3 days. Tom's eyes narrowed. "You're not riding alone, are you?" "No. There are 3 men, cowboys from Colorado, dealing with similar legal trouble. We are traveling together, safety in numbers." "These men have names?" "Samuel Tanner is the one I spoke with most. He seems honest." She hesitated. "Tom, I know this is not ideal, but I do not see another choice. I am not giving up the ranch without a fight." Something softened in Tom's craggy face. "No, I expect you are not. You are your father's daughter through and through, stubborn as the day is long. All right then, I will keep the place running. You take your rifle and you stay alert. And if these cowboys turn out to be anything less than honorable, you put a bullet in them and sort out the details later." Despite everything, Willa found herself smiling slightly. "Yes, sir." She packed quickly, practical clothes and her father's Winchester ammunition, and enough food for the journey. At 10 minutes to 3, she was riding back into Parowan, her mare fresh and her nerves singing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The boarding house was easy to find, and Samuel Tanner was already outside checking his saddle, his 2 companions loading their saddlebags nearby. Samuel looked up as she approached and nodded approvingly. "You pack light. That is good. We will make better time." "I have been riding these trails since before I could properly walk," Willa said. "I know what I need." They set out within minutes, leaving Parowan behind as they headed north on the road to Cedar City. The landscape rolled out around them in shades of red and tan and deep blue sky, the high desert country that Willa knew like her own skin. The men set a steady pace, not pushing but not dawdling either, and she found it easy to match their rhythm. For the first hour they rode mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. But gradually, as the miles passed and the horses settled into their stride, conversation began to flow. Pete told stories about their cattle drive, the mishaps and close calls that seemed frightening in the moment but hilarious in retrospect. Jack spoke less but with dry humor, his observations sharp and often unexpected. And Samuel, who clearly carried the weight of leadership, slowly began to relax, the tension in his shoulders easing as they put distance between themselves and their shared frustration. "So your father left you the ranch outright?" Samuel asked as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. "No conditions, no male overseer appointed?" "Nothing like that," Willa confirmed. "His will was very clear. Everything to me, full ownership because he trusted me to carry on his work. We talked about it before he got sick, about what he wanted for the place. He never once suggested I needed a husband to manage things for me." "My father was similar," Samuel said. "Raised me to run the outfit, taught me everything he knew about cattle and land management. But when he died, suddenly everyone wanted to treat me like I was just a boy playing at being a rancher, never mind that I'd been doing the actual work for 5 years already. The law apparently thinks I need my dead father's permission to conduct business, as though his signature from beyond the grave has more value than mine from the living world." "It makes no sense," Willa said, feeling the frustration rise fresh in her throat. "How is anyone supposed to run an operation if every transaction requires tracking down people who no longer exist or getting married just to have access to basic legal rights?" "It is about control," Jack said quietly. "The law is written by people who benefit from others being dependent, from limiting who can own what and conduct business freely. They dress it up as protection or tradition, but it is just control." "Well said," Samuel agreed. He glanced at Willa, and something in his expression made her pulse skip. "We will find this judge. We will make him understand that the law has to serve justice, not just maintain the convenience of people already in power. And if he will not listen, we will find someone who will." The certainty in his voice steadied something inside her. Here was someone who understood not just the injustice of her situation, but the deeper principle at stake, who was angry on her behalf in a way that felt like solidarity rather than condescension. She found herself watching him as they rode, noting the way he constantly scanned the landscape, the easy competence with which he managed his horse, the care he showed in his interactions with Pete and Jack. They made camp that evening near a creek, the water running clear and cold from the mountains. Willa helped gather firewood without being asked, automatically falling into the rhythms of trail work. Samuel raised an eyebrow as she built the fire with practiced efficiency, coaxing flames from kindling with barely any effort. "You have done this before," he observed. "My father believed I should know how to take care of myself in any situation," Willa said. "We spent plenty of nights camped out while working cattle or checking fence lines in the back country. He said ranching was not just about owning land, it was about knowing every inch of it personally." "Smart man." Samuel set up his bedroll near the fire. "My father said something similar. Said you could not ask men to work for you if you were not willing to do every job yourself first." They ate simple food, beans and hardtack and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, and talked as the stars emerged overhead. Pete and Jack eventually rolled into their blankets, but Willa found herself staying near the fire with Samuel, neither of them quite ready to surrender to sleep. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel said after a long stretch of comfortable silence. "Of course." "Are you scared? About what happens if this judge will not help us?" Willa considered the question, appreciating that he asked it straight out rather than dancing around the subject. "Yes, that ranch is all I have. More than that, it is all I know of my father now that he is gone. If I lose it, I lose the last connection to him, to everything he built and believed in. So yes, I am terrified." Samuel nodded slowly. "I am scared too. I have 8 men working for me back in Colorado, depending on the wages from that cattle sale. If I cannot pay them, I cannot keep the ranch running. Some of them have families, children who need food and shelter. The weight of that responsibility keeps me awake most nights." "But you keep going anyway." "What else is there to do? Give up? Let the system grind me down just because it is easier than fighting?" He met her eyes across the firelight. "I suspect you understand that better than most." She did. She understood it in her bones. That stubborn refusal to surrender even when the odds were stacked impossibly high. That determination to keep moving forward because standing still meant giving into forces that did not care whether you lived or died, succeeded or failed. Looking at Samuel Tanner, seeing her own fierce resolve reflected in his weathered face, Willa felt something shift inside her chest, a connection forming that went deeper than shared grievance. "We should try to get some sleep," she said, though she made no move to stand. "Long ride tomorrow." "We should," Samuel agreed, also not moving. "Willa?" "Yes?" "I am glad you are coming with us. This fight feels less lonely with you in it." The words settled over her like a warm blanket, chasing back some of the cold fear that had lived in her gut since her father's death. "I am glad too," she said softly. She finally rolled into her own blankets, positioned on the opposite side of the fire from the men, her rifle within easy reach. But despite Tom's warnings and her own usual caution, she felt safe in this camp, trusted these men in a way that should probably worry her, but somehow did not. Sleep came surprisingly easily, dreamless and deep. They were back on the road before sunrise, making good time on the packed earth track that connected Parowan to Cedar City. The morning air was crisp and clean, and Willa found herself feeling more hopeful than she had in weeks. Maybe it was the action itself, the sense of doing something rather than passively accepting her fate. Or maybe it was the company, the easy camaraderie that had developed among the four of them. Samuel rode beside her for most of the morning, and they talked about everything and nothing, about ranching and weather and the landscape rolling past. He told her about Colorado, about the high meadows where he ran his cattle in summer and the sheltered valleys where they wintered. She told him about the unique challenges of Utah's high desert, about managing water rights and dealing with the occasional band of wild horses that would try to steal her mares. "You talk about the work like you love it," Samuel observed. "I do. Is that strange?" "No, I feel the same way. There is something about the life, about being out in weather and working with animals, about the sheer physicality of it all. I could not imagine being cooped up in some office or shop doing the same thing day after day." He paused, though I suppose plenty of people would say ranching is doing the same thing day after day. "Those people have never actually ranched," Willa said. "Every day is different. Every season brings new challenges. The work is hard, but it is never boring." "Exactly." Samuel's smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger, less burdened. "Most people do not understand that. Most people have not really tried." They reached Cedar City just after noon, the town larger than Parowan and busier, with multiple streets and a courthouse that suggested its importance as a regional administrative center. Samuel led them directly to the courthouse, a two-story brick building that dominated the main square. Inside, a clerk sat at a desk piled with papers, looking harried and overworked. He glanced up as they entered, his expression cycling through irritation and resignation. "Help you?" he asked without enthusiasm. "We are looking for Judge Harrison Albright," Samuel said. "We were told he might be in Cedar City." "You are in luck. Judge Albright is here for the quarterly court sessions, but he is a busy man. You cannot just walk in and demand his time." "We are not demanding anything," Willa said, stepping forward. "We have a legitimate legal question that requires his expertise. We are willing to wait as long as necessary." The clerk studied her, something shifting in his expression. "What kind of legal question?" "Property rights and signature validity," Samuel said. "We have been told our signatures are not legally sufficient for certain transactions due to circumstances of birth and familial relationships. We believe this interpretation of the law is incorrect and hope Judge Albright will provide clarification." "Huh." The clerk shuffled through papers on his desk. "The judge finishes with his current caseload around 4 o'clock today. If you want to wait, I can put you on the schedule for immediately after, but I cannot promise how long he will give you. 5 minutes, maybe 10 if you are lucky." "We will take it," Samuel said immediately. "Thank you." They spent the afternoon in the courthouse waiting room, tension ratcheting higher with each passing hour. Willa found herself unable to sit still, pacing the worn floorboards while Pete and Jack played cards in the corner, and Samuel studied the legal notices posted on the walls as though they might contain some secret insight. Finally, as the courthouse clock struck 4, the clerk emerged from the judge's chambers. "Judge Albright will see you now, all of you." The judge's chambers were surprisingly modest, lined with law books and smelling of tobacco and old paper. Judge Harrison Albright himself was in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He gestured for them to sit in the chairs arranged before his desk. "My clerk says you have questions about signature validity and property rights," the judge said without preamble. "I have 15 minutes before I'm expected at a dinner engagement, so please be concise." Samuel glanced at Willa, and she nodded for him to go first. He laid out his situation clearly and without unnecessary detail, explaining about his father's death, the cattle sale, and the bank's refusal to honor his signature on the grounds that he lacked proper legal standing as head of his family's estate. Judge Albright listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Samuel finished, the judge turned to Willa. "And you, miss, what is your situation?" Willa told her story, feeling her voice strengthen as she spoke. She explained about the will, about her father's clear intentions, about the banker's dismissal of her signature solely because of her sex. When she finished, silence hung in the chamber for several long moments. "This is not a new problem," Judge Albright said finally. "The law as written in many territories, including Utah, does contain language that could be interpreted to require male oversight for certain transactions, particularly those involving significant property or financial matters. However, the law also recognizes the validity of wills and the right of property owners to dispose of their assets as they see fit. And it recognizes that a man of legal age who has been acting as de facto head of an estate has standing to represent that estate in business dealings." "So you are saying the bank was wrong?" Willa felt her heart hammering. "I am saying the bank took the most restrictive possible interpretation of the law, which is not the same as the only valid interpretation." Judge Albright pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. "I am going to draft 2 letters. Mr. Tanner, yours will state that based on the evidence of your father's death and your clear position as head of your ranching operation, your signature is legally valid for all business transactions related to that operation. This should be sufficient to compel the bank to honor your draft." He finished writing and moved to a second sheet. "Ms. Zimmerman, your situation is more complex because it involves the intersection of probate law and gender-based restrictions. However, your father's will is clear and was properly executed. I am writing a letter that states you are the legal owner of the property in question and that your signature is valid for all transactions related to that property. Any bank or business that refuses to honor your signature after receiving this letter will be acting in contempt of a judicial ruling." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much." "Do not thank me yet," the judge said, but not unkindly. "These letters will help with immediate transactions, but they do not solve the underlying legal problem. The territorial legislature would need to pass new laws to truly change things, to make it clear that women and young men have the same rights as older male property owners. What I am giving you today is a Band-Aid, not a cure." "A Band-Aid is more than we had an hour ago," Samuel said. "We are grateful, Your Honor." Judge Albright signed both letters with a flourish and sealed them with wax bearing his official stamp. "Take these back to Parowan. Present them to the banker. If he gives you any trouble, tell him to contact my chambers directly. I do not appreciate clerks and bankers making up their own interpretations of the law when they are not qualified to do so." Walking out of the courthouse, into the late afternoon sun, Willa felt lighter than she had in weeks. The letter felt substantial in her hand, a tangible piece of hope where before there had been only despair. "We did it," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "We actually did it." Samuel was grinning, the expression so genuine and open that it made him look years younger. "We did, thanks to Jack knowing about the judge, and all of us being stubborn enough to ride up here on a maybe." "I propose we find a decent meal and celebrate properly before we ride back," Pete suggested. "We have been eating trail food for too long, and I saw a restaurant on the main street that smelled promising." They found a small establishment that served roast chicken and vegetables, real bread with butter, and pie that Willa suspected might be the best thing she had ever tasted. The meal felt celebratory, the four of them sharing stories and laughing as the tension of the past weeks finally released its grip. Willa found herself watching Samuel across the table, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way he made sure everyone's glass stayed filled, the easy command that made even Pete and Jack, who were clearly peers rather than subordinates, naturally look to him for decisions. "So what will you do now?" she asked him when the meal was winding down. "Take the letter back to Parowan, cash your draft, and head back to Colorado?" Something flickered across Samuel's face, an emotion she could not quite name. "I suppose that is the logical plan. The men back home are counting on those wages." He paused. "What about you?" "Take the letter to the bank, get my property claim sorted out, try to figure out how to keep the ranch running long term." The thought of returning to the empty house, to managing everything alone, suddenly felt overwhelming in a way it had not before. These 3 days of company, of shared purpose, and easy conversation, had reminded her how isolating her life had become since her father's death. "You could come to Colorado," Samuel said abruptly, then looked surprised by his own words. "I mean, not permanently unless you wanted to, but just to see a different operation, learn some new techniques maybe. We run things differently than most Utah ranchers, higher elevation and different challenges. It might be interesting." Willa's heart skipped at the offer, at what might lie behind it. "That is kind of you, but I could not leave my ranch for an extended period. Tom is excellent, but he's not getting any younger, and the spring work is starting soon." "Of course, I understand." Samuel's disappointment was visible, which sent a warm flutter through Willa's chest. "But maybe once things are more settled, if you ever find yourself wanting to travel." "I would like that," Willa said softly, "very much." They rode back toward Parowan the next morning, but the earlier urgency had been replaced by something more bittersweet. Willa found herself wishing the journey could stretch on indefinitely, that they did not have to return to their separate lives and responsibilities. Samuel seemed similarly reluctant, finding excuses to slow the pace, to stop and rest the horses more frequently than necessary. By the time they made camp that evening, neither of them was pretending anymore that the delays were about anything other than not wanting the journey to end. Pete and Jack, clearly recognizing what was happening, made themselves scarce after dinner, citing the need to check the horses, and then conveniently finding reasons to stay at the picket line long after the animals were clearly fine. Willa and Samuel sat by the fire, the silence between them comfortable, but charged with unspoken words. Finally, Samuel cleared his throat. "I am not good at this," he said. "Talking about feelings and such. Ranching, I know. Cattle and horses and reading weather, all that makes sense, but this—" He gestured helplessly between them. "This is new territory for me." "For me too," Willa admitted. "I've never really had time for courting or romance. The ranch always came first. My father needed help, and then he was sick, and then he was gone, and I have just been trying to keep my head above water." "So we are both fumbling in the dark here?" "Apparently." Samuel turned to look at her directly, firelight casting shadows across his face. "Willa, these past few days with you have been the best I can remember in a long time. Not just because we solved our legal problems, though that certainly helped, but because talking with you feels easy in a way talking to most people does not. You understand things without me having to explain. You see the world the way I do, I think. And I find myself not wanting to say goodbye tomorrow, not wanting to ride back to Colorado and try to pretend this was just a practical alliance that has run its course." Willa's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I would like to court you properly if you are amenable. I know the logistics are complicated with you in Utah and me in Colorado. I know we both have responsibilities that cannot just be abandoned, but I would like to try, would like to see if this connection we seem to have is something that could grow into more." The offer hung in the air between them, full of possibility and risk in equal measure. Willa thought about returning to her empty house, to the lonely evenings and the weight of managing everything alone. She thought about Samuel riding away tomorrow and never seeing him again. this brief, bright spark of connection fading into just a memory. And she thought about her father, who had always told her that the best things in life were worth taking risks for. "I would like that too," she said, her voice steady, despite the emotions swirling in her chest. "I do not know how we make it work across the distance, but I want to try. You are right that this feels different, feels important. I do not want to just let it slip away because it is complicated." Samuel's smile was like sunrise, brilliant and warming. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his calloused fingers interlacing with hers. "We will figure it out. Write letters, visit when we can manage it, take things one day at a time. I am patient when something matters." They sat there holding hands until the fire burned down to embers, talking about possibilities and futures, about what they wanted from life beyond just survival. Willa learned that Samuel loved to read, that he had a small library of books at his ranch house that he had collected over years. Samuel learned that Willa could play the piano, that her mother had insisted she learn despite the impracticality of it for ranch life, and that she still played sometimes late at night when the loneliness got too heavy. When they finally separated to their respective bedrolls, Willa lay awake looking at the stars and feeling something she had not felt since before her father's death: genuine hope for the future. They reached Parowan late the following afternoon, the town appearing on the horizon like a promise and a threat combined. Samuel rode with Willa directly to the bank, all four of them entering together in a show of solidarity. The banker's expression when he saw them was almost comical, cycling through surprise and concern as Samuel and Willa laid Judge Albright's letters on his desk. "Judge Albright was very clear about the legal validity of our signatures," Samuel said, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "I trust there will be no further difficulties in honoring my bank draft or in processing Miss Zimmerman's property claim." The banker read both letters twice, his lips thinning with each pass. Finally, he looked up, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by grudging respect. "The judge's ruling is clear. I will process both transactions immediately." He paused. "I apologize for the earlier confusion. I was simply following what I understood to be standard procedure." "Standard procedure that disadvantaged anyone who did not fit into a narrow definition of acceptable," Willa said. "Perhaps this will encourage you to think more carefully about whose rights you are protecting and whose you are denying." They walked out of the bank an hour later, Willa with her property deed properly registered in her name alone, and Samuel with his considerable sum safely deposited and available for transfer to his operation in Colorado. The relief was palpable, but so was the knowledge that their time together was now very clearly coming to an end. "I need to start back to Colorado tomorrow," Samuel said as they stood in the street, the winter sun slanting low across the buildings. "The men have been waiting on their wages for weeks now. I have to get back and make sure everything is settled." "I know, I understand." Willa did understand, but that did not make the prospect of his departure any easier. "When do you think you might be able to visit?" "Spring roundup will take me into early May, and then I need to get the cattle moved up to summer pasture, but after that, by late May or June, I could manage a trip down here. Could stay for a week, maybe 2 if the timing works out." He hesitated. "That's a long time to wait. Too long, probably, for something this new and uncertain." "We will write," Willa said firmly. "Often. And 2 months is not so long, not when there is something real to wait for." Samuel stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of him in the cooling air. "May I write to you, Willa Zimmerman? May I tell you about my days and my thoughts and all the small things that happen that I find myself wanting to share with you?" "Please." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "I want to know everything. I want to feel like even though you are in Colorado and I am here, we are still part of each other's lives." "Then that is what we will do." He took her hand again, right there in the middle of the street where anyone could see, and brought it to his lips. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, completely at odds with his rough cowboy exterior, and it made Willa's heart stutter in her chest. "I will write as soon as I get back, and I will count the days until I can see you again." They said their goodbyes the next morning outside the boarding house, Pete and Jack giving Willa friendly farewells before tactfully taking the horses down the street to give her and Samuel privacy. The morning was cold and clear, promising good traveling weather, and Samuel's horse stamped impatiently, ready to be on the road. 2 months, Samuel said, holding both her hands now. Maybe less if I can manage it, and letters every week, I promise. 2 months, Willa agreed. I will be here, working the ranch and thinking about you more than I probably should. Think about me as much as you want. I will certainly be doing the same. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Stay safe, Willa. You too, Samuel Tanner. Do not let any ornery cattle get the better of you. She watched him ride away until he was just a speck on the southern horizon, Pete and Jack flanking him like outriders. Only then did she turn her own horse toward home, toward the ranch that was now legally and irrevocably hers, toward the life she would build there with or without anyone's permission or approval. Tom met her at the barn, his weathered face creasing into a genuine smile as she dismounted. Success? Complete success. She showed him the properly registered deed, her name in official ink. The ranch is mine, Tom. Legally mine, no questions asked. Your father would be proud. Tom's voice went gruff with emotion. Real proud, Miss Willa. You did not give up, did not let them grind you down. I had help, good help, from some decent people. She thought about Samuel's determination, about Pete and Jack's steady support, about Judge Albright's willingness to actually think rather than just repeat received wisdom. Turns out there are still people willing to do the right thing if you can just get them to pay attention. The next week settled into a familiar rhythm of ranch work, but everything felt different now. The work was still hard, the days still long, but Willa found herself approaching each task with renewed energy. This was hers, truly hers. And every fence she mended and every calf she birthed represented something she was building for herself rather than just maintaining until someone else decided to take it from her. True to his word, Samuel's first letter arrived 2 weeks after his departure. Brought by the mail rider from Cedar City, Willa read it sitting on her porch as the sun set. Samuel's careful handwriting describing his journey home, the relief of his ranch hands when they received their wages, the 1,000 small details of his daily life that he had promised to share. The letter ended with a postscript that made her smile. I think about you constantly. The work keeps my hands busy, but my mind wanders to Utah about every 5 minutes. Only 7 more weeks until I can see you again. The wait feels impossible. She wrote back that same evening, filling pages with her own stories, her own daily routines, the thoughts and feelings she had never really had anyone to share with before. The act of writing to Samuel felt intimate in a way she had not expected, creating a private space where they could be completely honest without the social performances that usually governed interactions between men and women. The letters became the cornerstone of her weeks. Each arrival was a small celebration, and each evening spent composing her responses felt like time stolen from the world's demands to focus on something just for herself. Through their written words, Willa felt she was getting to know Samuel in a way that would have taken months or years of occasional in-person visits. He wrote about his fears and doubts, about the pressure of keeping his operation viable, about his love for the land and the work. She shared her own struggles and triumphs, the victories of a successful calving season, and the frustrations of water disputes with a neighboring rancher. By late April, the tone of their letters had shifted, becoming warmer and more openly affectionate. Samuel stopped hedging his feelings behind careful language and started simply saying what he meant, that he missed her, that he wished she were there to watch the sunset with him, that he was falling for her more with each passing day. Willa found herself responding in kind, her natural reserve giving way to honest expressions of her growing feelings. When Samuel's letter arrived in early May announcing that he would be riding to Parowan in 2 weeks, Willa read it 3 times before the news fully sank in. He would arrive on May 20th and could stay for 10 days before needing to return for the summer cattle drive. 10 days. Not enough. Nowhere near enough, but infinitely more than the nothing they had had for the past 3 months. She prepared for his arrival with a nervous energy that made Tom raise his eyebrows but say nothing. She aired out the guest room in the ranch house, stocked the pantry with good food, even bought a new dress in town despite her usual disinterest in such things. The work felt important, felt like she was making space in her life for Samuel in a physical way that matched the space he had already occupied in her thoughts and heart. The day of his arrival, Willa found herself unable to focus on normal tasks. She kept watching the road, kept seeing riders that turned out to be tricks of heat, shimmer, and distance. By late afternoon, she had given up all pretense of work and was simply sitting on the porch, watching and waiting. When he finally appeared, a lone rider silhouetted against the lowering sun, her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She stood without conscious thought, one hand raised in greeting, and watched as Samuel spurred his horse into a faster pace when he spotted her. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward her with that easy cowboy grace, and Willa met him halfway. For a moment they simply stood there looking at each other. 3 months of longing and letter writing and imagining compressed into this single moment of reunion. "Hello, Willa," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Hello, Samuel. Welcome to my ranch." Then they were in each other's arms, propriety be damned, holding on like the other might disappear if they loosened their grip. Samuel smelled of horse and leather and sage, familiar and perfect, and Willa buried her face against his shoulder and felt something tight inside her chest finally release. "I missed you," she said into his shirt. "So much more than I knew how to say in letters." "I know. I missed you the same way." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands framing her jaw. "Can I kiss you? I have been thinking about asking permission to do that for approximately 3 months now." "Yes," Willa breathed. "Please, yes." His kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as though he was afraid she might change her mind. But when she pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, he deepened the kiss, one hand sliding into her hair, while the other wrapped around her waist. It felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once, familiar and thrilling in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you, Willa Zimmerman. I think I have been since you told me about your father's will, and I saw that fire in your eyes, that absolute refusal to surrender. But these months apart made it clear beyond any doubt. I love you. I love you too." The words came easily, naturally, because they were simply true. "I love the way you think, the way you see the world, the way you treat people with respect regardless of who they are. I love that you fight for what is right even when it is hard. I love you, Samuel Tanner." They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other, until Tom cleared his throat from the barn doorway. "Should I be expecting a guest for dinner, Miss Willa?" Willa laughed, the sound startled out of her by sheer joy. "Yes, Tom, this is Samuel Tanner from Colorado. He will be staying for a week or so." "Pleasure to meet you, sir," Samuel said, extending his hand as he and Willa finally separated. "Willa has told me a lot about you in her letters." Tom shook his hand, his grip firm and assessing. "Has she now? Well, any friend of Miss Willa's is welcome here. I will get your horse settled while you two catch up properly." The next 10 days were the happiest of Willa's life. Samuel fit into the ranch routine as though he had always been there working alongside her and Tom with the easy competence of someone who understood the rhythms of this life. They rode fence lines together, checking for winter damage. They worked cattle, separating calves for branding. They sat on the porch in the evenings and talked for hours, filling in the gaps that letters could not quite bridge. But more than the work, what made the time precious was the simple fact of his presence. Having someone to share meals with, to laugh with, to touch casually as they moved through their days, reminded Willa of everything she had been missing in her self-sufficient solitude. Samuel seemed to feel the same, often reaching for her hand or finding excuses to stand close, as though reassuring himself that she was real and present, On the 5th evening of his visit, they rode out to a high meadow on the ranch where Willa's father had liked to watch the sunset. The view stretched for miles. The valley spread out below them and the mountains rising in every direction, painted in shades of gold and red by the dying light. "It is beautiful here," Samuel said, standing close beside her as their horses grazed nearby. "I can see why your father chose this place, why you fight so hard to keep it." "It is home," Willa said simply, "the first and only home I have ever known. But Samuel, I have been thinking—" "About what?" She turned to face him, gathering her courage. "About us, about the future. These past months, these past days have shown me that I do not want to live my life alone. I love this ranch, but I love you more. And I am tired of the distance, tired of snatched visits and letters that take weeks to arrive." Samuel's expression was intense, focused entirely on her. "What are you saying, Willa?" "I am saying that if you asked me to marry you, I would say yes. I am saying that I would be willing to figure out how to combine our operations or sell one or both and start fresh somewhere new. I am saying that I want to build a life with you, whatever that takes." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "Willa Zimmerman, I came here planning to ask you exactly that, but I was waiting for the right moment, trying to find the perfect words. But there are no perfect words for this, are there? There is just the truth. I love you desperately. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build something together, work side by side, raise children if we are blessed with them. Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a beat-up Colorado cowboy who promises to spend every day trying to deserve you?" "Yes." The word came out fierce and certain. "Yes, absolutely, yes." He kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise, and Willa felt her future clicking into place. This was right, was meant to be, was everything she had not even known she was waiting for. They made plans over the remaining days of Samuel's visit. Neither wanted to give up their ranch entirely, the land representing too much history and heart to simply abandon. But Samuel's property in Colorado was larger and more established, with better access to markets and rail lines. After much discussion, they decided that Samuel would sell his Colorado ranch but retain some of his best breeding stock. Meanwhile, Willa would keep her Utah property, and they would work to expand it into a significant operation. Tom, when informed of their plans, surprised them both by offering to move into the main house and manage day-to-day operations during seasons when Samuel and Willa needed to be elsewhere or when they eventually wanted to travel. "I am not getting any younger," he said with a shrug. "Nice to know there is a future here worth investing in." The wedding took place in late June, a simple ceremony in Parowan, with Judge Albright himself making the trip from Cedar City to officiate. "Only fitting," the judge said with a smile, "since I had a hand in bringing you two together. Besides, I like seeing the law used to support happiness rather than deny it." Pete and Jack came down from Colorado for the wedding, Pete serving as Samuel's best man, and Jack presenting Willa with a beautifully carved music box as a wedding gift. The small church was packed with neighbors and other ranchers, many of whom had heard the story of the banker and the judge and appreciated seeing a happy ending. When Judge Albright pronounced them husband and wife, when Samuel kissed her in front of everyone with a joy that was impossible to contain, Willa felt a sense of rightness that transcended mere happiness. This was partnership, true partnership, built on respect and shared values, and a love that had been tested by distance and circumstance and had only grown stronger. Their first year of marriage was not easy. Combining two ranching operations proved complicated, involving countless negotiations with banks and suppliers, the logistics of moving cattle and equipment, and the challenge of learning each other's methods and approaches. Samuel and Willa had their share of arguments, disagreements about how to handle various situations, clashes of the strong wills that had allowed each of them to survive as independent ranchers. But every argument ended with them remembering why they were doing this, with renewed commitment to making it work. They learned to compromise, to value each other's expertise, to trust that they were stronger together than either had been alone. By the end of that first year, the ranch was thriving. Their combined herds healthy and growing, and they had established themselves as one of the most respected operations in southern Utah. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. The thought of bringing a child into their hard-working life both wonderful and daunting. But Samuel's reaction, his immediate fierce protectiveness mixed with unbridled excitement, steadied her. Their son was born in late October, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Samuel Thomas, after both his father and Tom, who had become like a grandfather to the child. Holding her son for the first time, Willa thought about her own father, about how proud he would have been to see his ranch not just surviving but thriving, to see his daughter happy and loved and building a family of her own. Little Samuel was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Clara, after Willa's mother. And then, 3 years after that, another boy they called Henry. The ranch house that had once echoed with loneliness, filled with the sounds of children playing, with laughter, and the thousand small chaos of family life. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful with the children, while still maintaining the discipline necessary to teach them the realities of ranch life. Willa watched him teach young Samuel to ride, saw him carefully explain the workings of the natural world to Clara, held Henry while Samuel told elaborate bedtime stories about cowboys and adventures. This was the life her father had wanted for her, she realized. Not just property ownership or legal recognition, but the freedom to choose her own path, to build something meaningful on her own terms. Tom lived to see all 3 grandchildren, as the children called him, before passing peacefully in his sleep at 78. His death hit them all hard, but especially Willa, who had known him her entire life. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the valley, and every year on the anniversary of his death, the family would ride up and tend his grave and tell stories about the cantankerous old cowboy who had helped shape their lives. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Samuel's business acumen combined with Willa's deep knowledge of the land and its needs created an operation that adapted to changing markets and conditions. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market crashes, and competition from larger outfits, always managing to come through intact because they approached every challenge as partners. Their children grew up understanding that the ranch was not just their livelihood, but their legacy. The physical embodiment of their parents' determination to build something lasting in the face of systems that had tried to deny them that opportunity. Young Samuel eventually took over the day-to-day management, proving to have inherited both his parents' work ethic and their innovative thinking. Clara, who had her mother's gift with horses, established a breeding program that became renowned throughout the territory and later the state when Utah achieved statehood in 1896. Henry, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, inspired by family stories about Judge Albright, and determined to fight for others facing the same legal obstacles his parents had overcome. As Willa and Samuel grew older, they gradually stepped back from the grinding daily work, spending more time on the porch watching sunsets and less time in the saddle checking cattle. But retirement never meant inactivity. They traveled, visiting parts of the country they had only read about, always returning home with renewed appreciation for the land they had built their life on. They wrote letters to their children and grandchildren, passing on wisdom and stories, making sure the next generation understood where they came from and what had been sacrificed to secure their future. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted 3 days. Judge Albright, now in his 90s and using a cane, made the trip from Cedar City one last time, embraced warmly by the family he had helped create through one simple act of interpreting the law fairly rather than restrictively. "You two did well," the judge told them as they sat together on the porch, watching the younger generations playing in the yard. "You took the chance I gave you and built something remarkable. This is what the law is supposed to do: remove obstacles and create opportunities for people to thrive." "We could not have done it without you," Willa said, her hand finding Samuel's automatically, as it had countless times over 4 decades. You saw us as people deserving of justice rather than just cases to be dismissed. I did what any decent judge should do, Albright said. You two did the hard part. The building and growing and refusing to quit. That takes a different kind of courage than making a legal ruling. Samuel squeezed Willa's hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that had started to settle into his joints. We had something worth fighting for. Each other, this place, the future we wanted to create. That made all the difference. Judge Albright left the next day, and it was the last time they saw him. He passed away peacefully 6 months later, and the family made the trip to Cedar City for his funeral, wanting to pay their respects to the man who had changed their lives with his willingness to think beyond easy answers. Willa and Samuel lived to see their grandchildren have children of their own, the ranch house echoing with new generations. They watched the 20th century arrive, bringing automobiles and telephones and changes that would have seemed impossible in the world where they had first met. But through all the changes, the land remained constant. The red rock and high desert that had witnessed their love story continuing to provide the foundation for everything their family had become. They died within a year of each other, Samuel first at 84 and Willa following at 83, as though she could not bear to remain in the world without him. They were buried side by side on the hill where Tom rested, overlooking the valley and the ranch they had built together. Their headstones were simple, bearing just their names and the dates of their lives. But to their family and to anyone who knew their story, those stones represented something much larger, the proof that love and determination could overcome even systems designed to deny people their fundamental rights and dignity. The ranch continued under family ownership, passed down through generations who understood that they were stewards of something larger than mere property. Young Samuel's great-great-grandson, working the same land in the early 21st century, would sometimes ride up to the hilltop cemetery and stand among the old headstones thinking about the great-great-grandmother and great-great-grandfather he had never met but whose courage had made his own life possible. The story of Willa and Samuel became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays, the details polished by repetition, but the core truth remaining constant, that a woman whose signature was called Invalid because of her sex and a cowboy who faced similar dismissal had found a judge who called their signatures valid, and in the process had found each other and built a love that transcended every obstacle placed in their path. Their letters, carefully preserved by their children, eventually ended up in the state historical archives, providing scholars and researchers with an intimate window into what it meant to live and love and struggle in the American West during the late 19th century. Reading those letters, historians marveled at the intelligence and determination of both writers, at the way they had supported and challenged each other, at the depth of affection that came through even the most practical discussions of cattle management and water rights. But to their family, those letters were something simpler and more profound. They were proof that real love, the kind that lasts and grows and sustains people through decades of hard work and inevitable loss, is built on partnership and respect and the willingness to fight side by side against whatever challenges arise. Willa and Samuel had faced their challenges in courtrooms and banks, in droughts and harsh winters, in the daily grind of making a life in difficult country. They had met each challenge together and in doing so had created not just a successful ranch but a template for how to build a marriage and a family on foundations of mutual respect and unwavering support. On summer evenings, when the current generation of family gathered on the porch of the ranch house that Willa's father had built and that his daughter and her husband had expanded and improved, they would sometimes talk about those early days. They would speculate about what it must have been like to face such arbitrary obstacles, to have their fundamental rights denied based on accidents of birth and family structure. And they would feel grateful, not just for the material legacy of land and livestock, but for the example of courage and perseverance that Willa and Samuel had left behind, because in the end, that was their truest legacy, not just the ranch that still bore their mark, not just the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood, but the story itself, The reminder that ordinary people facing extraordinary injustice could still prevail through determination and love, and the willingness to seek out those rare individuals like Judge Albright who valued justice over convenience. The land endured as it always had. The red rocks stood unchanged by human dramas. The creek continued to run through the valley, providing life-sustaining water. The mountains kept their watch over the high desert country. But the story of Willa Zimmerman and Samuel Tanner, of a signature declared invalid and then validated, of a chance meeting that became a lifetime partnership, lived on in the memories and hearts of those who came after, a testament to what becomes possible when people refuse to accept injustice and when they find others willing to stand beside them in that refusal. And so the ranch thrived, generation after generation, built on a foundation laid by a woman who would not surrender and a man who saw her as an equal partner, both of them validated by a judge who understood that law should serve justice rather than simply maintain the status quo. Their love story had started with bureaucratic obstacles and arbitrary rules, but it had become something much larger, a blueprint for how to build a life of meaning and purpose, even in the face of systems designed to prevent exactly that. In the quiet moments when family members walked the land that Willa and Samuel had worked and loved, they could still feel the presence of that original partnership, the determination and devotion that had transformed a legal obstacle into the beginning of something beautiful and lasting. The signature that had been called invalid had proven to be more than valid. It had been the first mark in creating a legacy that would endure for generations, a family built on love and respect, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserved the chance to build the life they chose, regardless of the arbitrary limitations others tried to impose. And on certain evenings, when the light hit the valley just right, and the wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, it almost seemed possible to see them there still, Willa and Samuel, young and determined and so deeply in love, riding together across the land that had become both their battlefield and their sanctuary, their challenge and their reward, the physical embodiment of everything they had built together one day at a time across more than 6 decades of partnership. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and memory. But it also continued as the best stories do in the lives of those who came after, in the land that still bore their mark, in the values they had instilled and the example they had set. The Invalid signature had become valid not just legally, but existentially, proving that human worth could not be determined by gender or age or the arbitrary rules of those in power, but only by the content of character and the willingness to fight for what was right and true and just. This was their legacy, and it endured.